I'm sick of bad bass. So sick, in fact, that I made a promise to myself. I never want to hear it in my tracks again. To do that, I'm digging through every scientific study I can find on what makes bass sound amazing. And to prove that the method works, I'll use my findings to write a bass line so good I'd actually want to release it. To begin this journey, I had to find a starting point. A bass line so bad it would make me throw up a little just thinking about it. One that would inspire me to never want to hear bad bass ever again. I think I've officially made the worst bass line that I can. Now that I got that terrible bass line out of my system, I was ready to start with the seemingly simple first step of writing my bass line: picking the right notes. The notes that will play, aka the pitch, in my humble opinion, are very important. One of the reasons why this first bass was terrible. But first things first, what the hell even is pitch? According to this paper, pitch is a collection of sound waves. The lower the pitch, the wider the frequency waves will be. The higher the pitch, the more narrow they will be. But in my experience, we can't just play any pitch and expect it to sound good. We have to consider the other notes of the arrangement. That idea goes all the way back to Pythagoras in ancient Greece. Turns out the man was not only obsessed with triangles, but also audio. Pythagoras discovered ratios of notes that sound better when played together, like the octave, the major third, the perfect fifth. These findings are still being studied and researched today, and they are the basis of Western modern music. The old Greek geezer found that if you played the root note of a chord in the bass, it can help thicken the sound. But only playing the root note can get boring fast. Playing the same note over and over again is about as exciting as watching the hair of my chopped off sideburns grow back to look like I'm a normal human again. Here's another study that showed participants preferred music that was slightly unpredictable. To do that, occasionally we'll change our root note to some other notes in the scale to keep it sonically interesting. I also found that even though a low, deep bass sounds sweet, too low might be a no-no. Apparently, bass sounds 30 Hz and below can make the listener feel uneasy. This one showed specifically that bass tones at 17 Hz caused unease and fear in participants that heard them. If your bad bass alone wasn't enough to scare away your listeners, then leaving in some 17 Hz definitely will. But 17 and 30 Hz are really low frequencies. The ear really can't hear them, and most speakers can't even recreate them. I think it'd be a good idea to focus your bass line on some pitches you can actually hear. And with all that information in mind, I laid out the beginnings of a new bass line. It's one thing to know what notes to play, but another thing entirely to know when to play them. And the weird part is, your brain already knows the answer. According to these 4 studies, bass helps improve the rhythm of a song and also encourages people to dance more. This seems to be a worldwide phenomenon for humans. Low-end frequencies mixed with rhythm makes you want to dance. I'm actually pretty sure that that is the only thing that EDM is based off of. And if I wanted the best bass possible, I was going to have to nail the groove. Another big part of the danceability of songs comes from the space between the rhythm, which is often called syncopation. You can think of it like this: sing, go, patient, sing, go, patient. This study shows that syncopated rhythms were rated as more complex and enjoyed more, while another showed that syncopation increased pupil dilation and activated reward centers in the brain. I, for one, am all in on more reward networks in the brain. These studies point towards adding at least some syncopation to keep things interesting and more enjoyable. But that's just scientific studies. What about actual hit songs? Do they show the same patterns? Those questions led me down an audio rabbit hole that if you didn't know about before, will blow your mind. Spotify analyzes every song that gets uploaded to their platform, and their ranking system is so good it can actually predict a hit song with up to 90% accuracy before the song is released. That's pretty crazy. One of the metrics Spotify analyzes is danceability. It uses a combination of tempo, musical patterns, and the beat to tell us how danceable a track is. I found a database of 600 hit songs from the year 2000 that tracks some of these metrics that I'd like to take a look at. According to the data, there's a pretty even moderate distribution of danceability, with 1 being the most danceable and 0 being the least. The middle seems to be from maybe 0.55 to about 0.69, somewhere in here. To give you an audio idea of what the hell this even means, here are some songs that have this rating: We Can't Stop by Miley Cyrus, Photograph by Ed Sheeran, Love Story by Taylor Swift. That means that our song might sound the best using a danceability or a groove factor of somewhere in that range. Or maybe not the best, but most like the hits. But there's another factor we have to consider while choosing where exactly the groove of our bass should go. And it's one that can change the feel of our entire song. We have to also consider in this genre. The genre not only impacts the groove, but a bunch of other critical factors for our bass, which I will talk about later. I found another different data set that illustrates this really well. Thanks to YakEvery4395 on Reddit for making this graph. He pulled data from over 1 million Spotify tracks on this same topic that we were just talking about. You can see that the danceability of genres varies greatly. For example, deep house is going to be a lot more danceable than, say, folk. For whatever genre of song you're making, it probably helped to listen to other tracks and try to replicate what they're doing. And because I'm working with pop music, I'm going to use something that keeps the groove, but also stays within the range of medium danceability like the chart said, whatever that means. It's improving, but it could still get a lot better. And better, oh, it would get. Now that we had the notes and rhythm, it was time to dial in the tone, which turns out is a lot harder than you might think. After hearing the last bass, I'm not completely satisfied with the tone. Although we can shape the final sound from mixing and plugins, the best results are going to come from getting the right sound from the start. I spent literal days searching for the perfect bass tone before, so I was extremely worried about this one. Let's see what the science says about choosing bass tones. And after hours of searching, nothing was pointing me towards what my bass should actually sound like. All I found were some audio-related studies that led me no closer to figuring out the next step to take. And some of them were pretty strange. Look at this study. Apparently, bass can affect your taste. After listening to low frequencies, participants rated wine as having more body and aroma. I guess that's great news for sommeliers. If you want your restaurant to smell like wine, then blast some 808s in there. I had to keep searching to find out if science could lead my bass to the promised land. And sure enough, I saw a glimmer of bass tone hope peek its head over the horizon. Now we're getting somewhere. This study is what I'm talking about. This study shows that bass lines share a lot of similarities between genres. Up to 65% of songs could be identified in their genre by the repetitiveness of their bass lines. That's pretty high. Kind of like what we talked about in the last section, but this feels way more on brand than smelly wine. And with that study as inspiration, I decided the best way of choosing our bass tone would be to pull the oldest trick in the book. Steal the sounds that are already working. And so I did. I listened to my genre and decided on recording a live bass to get the sound I was after. But there was still another step of the process to nail down. My bass was sounding alright, but it was never going to be amazing until I actually mixed it. But could I even find studies on mixing bass? There's got to be more studies on mixing bass, right? Right? This study shows that some of the best determinants of a high-quality mix is a balanced sound. You might think that that means we can set every element to the same volume and our audio seesaw would be balanced. But no, that's wrong. Human hearing is much more complex than that. The real audio seesaw looks way scarier. There's something that you need to know about while mixing bass, and it's called the Fletcher-Munson curve. It basically says that we don't hear all frequencies equally. Our ears are the most sensitive to mid-range frequencies between 2K and 5K, which happen to be the most important frequencies for determining speech. So even if your bass, your mids, and your trebles all are the same in decibels, you won't hear them that way. It's like your seesaw just gets warped. And to make the seesaw even scarier, that warpedness can change. At quiet volumes, bass and treble can sound lacking. But when turned up, they can be overpowering on the exact same mix. It's like trying to balance a marshmallow on one side, turning the volume up, and then getting a bowling ball. This is why mixes can sound amazing at one volume and like garbage at another. Or in my case, garbage at both volume levels. To balance the seesaw the best we can, we'll have to listen at a variety of loudness levels and use our ears to determine when it's ready. And if that weird audio seesaw wasn't complicated enough, we also have to deal with another big problem. This study here talks about frequency masking. Frequency masking just means that the frequencies of one sound cover the frequencies of another, making it harder to hear. This specific study was interesting because even though that they didn't have conflicting frequencies, a loud high mid sound could still mask a low sound. This tells us that the relationship between the volume of our instruments is super important. Too loud of a guitar in the treble might mean less clarity in my bass, and less clarity in the bass is not on my menu for today. To make things worse, in 2025, the self-titled TikTok era of music, we have to be especially aware of mixing for one of the most unexpected ways of consuming audio. We've got to be able to hear the bass on our phone. Most phones have small speakers. Small speakers equals less bass. That means to hear them properly on our phones, we might have to turn up our bass in the mix. To help with that, I'm going to give my bass a boost around 300 hertz to give my phone a fighting chance. I'm also going to help balance the bass in a song by adding the last important ingredient. We are 90% of the way there, but our song is still not ready. We need to master it. Mastering will help our song compete with other songs in terms of loudness and dynamic impact, which sounds complicated because it kind of is. Let's hop into what the science says on mastering and loudness. When it comes to loudness, people tend to prefer louder versions of the same song, all else being equal. This is part of the reason why the loudness wars started happening in the early 90s and are still continuing in some circles today. For us, that means we'll have to make our song loud. But there's a limit to how loud we can make our song. Too much loudness and will introduce nasty clipping and distortion, which, as you might have guessed, in high doses isn't awesome. This study showed that too much hard distortion can negatively impact the perceived audio quality. It also mentioned that more subtle methods like soft clipping weren't noticed. This points towards a gentler approach to our mastering. We'll still want it to sound as loud as possible, but the less clipped and nasty it sounds, the better. After learning that, I went back and analyzed some of the hits to see how loud we should really push our song, which for some songs was way crazier than I expected. Back at our chart of 600 songs, we can see some of the distributed loudness of our songs. The louder a song is, the closer this value will be to 0. Most songs on the graph seem to fall between -7 and -4. But what blows my mind the most about this graph are the ones that are the loudest, like Levitating by Dua Lipa, which is a whopping -2.27. That's louder than my neighbor's leaf blower at 7 a.m. To give you some perspective, I'm gonna put it on my track, turn it up to be that loud, and you'll hear it's gonna sound garbage. Nice, there we go, we're at -2.2. Sounds so bad. Sounds so bad. Hopefully you can see now why it makes sense that most songs are like that -6 rather than -2, which is also confirmed once again by this chart on Reddit, which shows that most tracks are between -5 and -10. But once again, depending on the genre. But it was time to put these findings to work. I mastered the song with these ideas in mind to a final volume of around -6. And after going back through, mixing, polishing the song, and nailing the bass, I was ready to play the final, scientifically better result. Was the bass even good? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're down there, if you learned something from this video, leave a like. And if you think the science of mixing bass is tough, wait till you see this video right up here about the science of writing a hit song.